Talk of the Trollway spotlights Mount Horeb, Wisconsin's unique artists, entertainers, hobbyists, and personalities.
Making a pie crust is a little bit art and a little bit science.
Look at that.
It's knowing when to follow the recipe and when to make adjustments.
This way, because I think it's going to balance better.
Mount Horeb attorney Karla started making pies as she helped out in the family kitchen.
Backwards even. Looks good, looks good, looks good. Looks like everyone's about ready. 2 sticks of butter. It's for 2 crusts.
These days, she passes on the tradition on behalf of the Mount Horeb Public Library and their annual pie sale fundraiser. I'm your host, Gary Schutz, and on this episode of Talk of the Trollway, we'll sit in on the class Karla teaches to recruit new pie makers. During her lessons, here at the library, she encourages her students to trust themselves, saying if they avoid doing just a few things wrong, everything should turn out just right.
When we started doing the class, people were saying, I don't want to have to buy it anymore, but I've been afraid of making a crust.
I love pie. It's my favorite dessert, and I never make it because I'm completely intimidated because, I don't want to make a bad pie crust, so I just don't.
Sometimes I make total failure crusts too, so, it happens to everyone. So hopefully this will have some hints that'll be helpful. Weirdly enough, it's all sort of science when you look at it, and it's the science of each kind of thing. When I teach the pie crust classes, because we need more people for our pie sale, it's trying to explain, don't stir it too much. Don't do things that are going to make it tough or not pleasant to eat. Think of tossing it, don't think of stirring it like that. Science-wise, that's the exact opposite of how you make bread. Because when you make bread, you need it to stretch glutens and make it elastic. That's the last thing you want in a pie crust or a muffin or a cake. So I think it's sort of learning, and I think most people know it internally, but they don't know necessarily how to express it. That there's a scientific reason for why you treat a pie crust different than a meringue, different than a loaf of bread.
A good pie crust is a balancing act.
As funny as it is, when Elton Brown used to do his Good Eats show, one of the things that was interesting was he talked about the science of this is why this tastes good or why it isn't as good this way. And that's actually, it makes a lot of sense. And the page that I handed out in the class talking about if you make this choice or this, these are the things that can make the difference between it being considered a success or a failure. They do matter, but I've never taken a class. I use the KitchenAid a lot when I make pie. This is why I love this, because mine's done. My son tells me that's not authentic because if you aren't using the hand pastry blender, then it's still not really homemade crust. He hasn't made as many as I have. I think working on getting down the proportions, following the recipe, and just sort of doing it. And I don't know if I'd call it a trick. I think the hardest thing is, like when we started talking about trying to help more people learn how to make pie crust from scratch, was trying to remember the things that I do that I don't think about. So it's like when you tie your shoes, and teaching someone to tie their shoes can be hard because it's like, well, you just do it. I tuck this under the bottom crust. Just learned through my grandmother and my mom. And it was just something we did and they did. You just knew how to make pies. And then we also had things like the church socials and events where you were asked to make 1 or 2 pies or whatever and donate them for an event. So it was just sort of part of one of the things that you learned growing up. We make a blueberry pie with ginger and fresh lemon. That's like our family standard. That's my kids' favorite blueberry pie. And we used to get the blueberries from Canada when we'd go fishing. We'd bring back coolers full of blueberries. We used to laugh with my kids that the year consisted of pie season. So spring you had rhubarb because it was fresh. And then my oldest daughter really loves peach pie, so then you sort of move into peach pie season. And then fall, you move into apple, and my son's favorite is pecan. And then you get pumpkin at Thanksgiving, because you have to have pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving. Probably the craziest flavor combination was fresh pineapple, fresh mango, lime juice, cinnamon, and hot chili pepper. It was a recipe that was in a book I found. I thought, okay, this sounds very, very tropical. And it actually does work together, because it's just enough so there's an underlying sense of heat that blends with the cinnamon, like in a Mexican hot chocolate. I mean, it actually works. It's not an in-your-face, make your throat hurt sort of combination. Every year when I go through the cookbooks before the sale, it's the should I try this thing. Some of them are just too much work or too expensive to make. I made a homemade caramel peanut pie one year that, if you liked a Snickers bar, it was like the inside of a Snickers bar, but you could only eat slices about that big. It tasted really good, but it was also an awful lot of work for one pie. I've resurrected things that came through my family, and I would call them poor people pies. Instead of pecan pie, there's something called an oatmeal pie. Sounds like the worst, ickiest thing on the face of the earth, but instead of nuts in it, there's uncooked old-fashioned oats that gives it sort of the texture, and you can put some coconut in it too. So it's very much like a pecan pie, except my guess is it came about when people wanted something like that, but they couldn't afford pecans because they're expensive. All the recipes I've ever read, and I read recipe books sometimes, like novels, we'll talk about how precise you have to be in baking. I think one of the weird things with stuff like both bread dough and pie dough, so a similarity even though they're real different, is all of the atmospheric conditions affect it. So people think of flour as flour. Well, flour that's in this room with some windows open and it's humid outside is taking on moisture just being there. It may not feel wet and sticky, but it's taking on moisture. I don't know at the class why their water amounts seem so different, unless we possibly had different amounts in there, or we're using ice water, so maybe one had more ice cubes than the other. That could have been part of it. But at least, and I think this is the hardest thing in trying to teach people to make dough, is here's your basic recipe and there's a range for the water. You mix it until it feels the right way. And my description is, if it feels kind of like that commercial Play-Doh that people buy for their kids, that's enough water but not too much water, and it'll be easy to handle and roll out. Depending upon your atmospheric conditions, what type of flour you use, and whether you use shortening, butter, lard, combination thereof, it's going to take a different amount of water to get that consistency. So I guess the science of it, and sort of winging at the same time, is trusting it that it just takes enough to feel the right way. Sort of like a muscle memory thing. I know how I do it right because it's just what's ingrained. I think the idea of following the rules, I mean, I use the hand motion of don't stir it like this, and when I see people do that, they're probably not going to have a great result because of, again, the science of it. It's probably going to be kind of a rubbery crust, and that's not what they're going to want. Watching YouTube videos. They have little video clips, and you can watch with, oh, that's all you do.
The tastiest pies are built from the crust up. We'll show you how to hand make a delicious homemade pie crust with ease.
This is looking good. I have a few lumps that are a little bit big in there yet, but see how it just sort of, it looks almost sort of like breadcrumbs.
Yeah. Okay.
But the bigger lumps are not a terrible, awful thing. Again, they have to do it enough to sort of get that. It's not really muscle memory, but that memory of this is how it should feel. Just trust yourself. When we sort of restarted the Friends of the Library, because it had been an active group, I think almost back to the 60s. I don't remember the exact starting date, but then it sort of died out. And the role had totally changed. So the Friends used to get like all the volunteers and do story time and those things. And now those are things that are done by the professionals at the building. So we tried to go into more of a fundraising mode, supporting, events and programming and buying materials. And initially we did the pie sale, we maybe had 30 pies, and they were gone in like, I don't know, maybe not even an hour. Then we wanted to get more, and we were fortunate enough to have some people who lived here in town who had access to a commercial kitchen so they could make pies. So for people who didn't feel comfortable making a pie or couldn't do it anymore, they could chip in $10 or $8 or whatever it was at the time, and that would go toward having extra pies made, so it got our numbers up to make a bigger sale. Well, the people who had been doing that aren't around here anymore, so we started getting concerned as a group about, oh my gosh, we are not going to have enough pies. So we decided to try to grow some pie makers by encouraging people to learn how to make crust, because people would come, see the sign up and say, well, I don't know how to make crust, or I'm afraid to make crust, so therefore I can't do it unless you want me to buy a Mrs. Smith's or Surefine or whatever and bake it for you. So we said, okay, should we try doing a pie crust making class? And I think this is the 3rd year we've done that. So we're trying to grow our own, so I'm being selfish because in the long run I want to make fewer pie crusts. I rolled out 16 crusts last night for the event that we'll be working on, and put them in pans and froze them. In the last few years, I've probably made, including family events, probably 70 pies a year. Most of them not being for my family. So I guess you can add that. If I started when I was in middle school, I'm 51, you can do the math. It's grown, it's probably leveled at 130. It sort of varies. One of the problems we've had is pie making is generally considered as an age group thing. A lot of the people who are making a lot of them aren't anymore. They can't, they're in nursing homes, they died. And with sort of this, I don't know, renaissance, that's probably too big of a word, for people sort of wanting to learn to do stuff that they can remember from their childhood, there's now interest in people learning to do that again.
Don't you wish we would do that right now?
What I do like about the classes is trying to just help people overcome something that's a fear. Everybody successfully has a crust in a pan.
Oh my gosh.
Now,
That deserves a round of applause.
I didn't learn to swim as a child. I took swimming lessons as an adult. I'm not very good as a swimmer because I have a fear. And no, making a crust isn't like that, but trying to be relaxed about it and say, okay, yep, there's a science to this, but basically you got to trust yourself, I think is a lesson in a lot of ways. And if people can walk away going, I can do this, I just think that's a really cool thing. Looks good. Some people have said I need to take the class again. I've had, because it's usually women that take the class, although some men have. I have had husbands usually come up and say thank you. And I have a friend who actually taught my kids in the intermediate center here, who took a class here in the kitchen because she couldn't come to the class, and she now makes pie. She now makes the pies for the family events. She is the designated pie maker. So whether that's a curse or a blessing, I'm not sure. But I think that, for her, it's like, okay, I got it now. People look for the event, and it's funny because people will look for pies from particular people. There is a lady here in town who grows her own berries, and she also grows her own cherries. So we will have people camped out. So the sale starts at 9. As early as 7:30 saying, do you have one of Mrs. X's here? Because they are after that pie. Everything goes toward stuff that benefits the public. Is the purpose of the Friends and all of their fundraisers. It has purchased collection materials like Lucky Day materials, which are the ones that you can't see on the system. You have to go into our building to see it. It has purchased technology. We got a new train for the children's room. We've done furnishings in the past. It doesn't go toward, the new copy or the things that should be in the regular budget. It's stuff that people see and touch and get to check out, or it enhances the collection. I think it is partly the demographic of this area, and I do think there's a big, very strong history of just volunteerism. Although we don't think of ourselves as being all that affluent, we are affluent enough that people can say, I can put out X dollars to make something and donate it. I think that people want a sense of roots or togetherness. We have a lot of people that want to do something to help, but they really don't want to go to meetings every month, and they don't want to keep track of the books or do technical things. So this is a way that they contribute in a way that they like, so I can get enjoyment out of making it and contributing it for someone else. I talked to one friend whose husband loves pie probably more than anything on earth, close to as much as her. And I got a text from her saying, I got a round of applause.
Coming up on Talk of the Trollway, it could be you or someone you know. Let us know who we haven't met yet. Email talktrollway@gmail.com. Talk of the Trollway is a production of Mount Horeb, Wisconsin's Village Cable Station, Trollway TV.